Almost 111 years ago to this day, the Federal Reserve was created. And this made way for a century of the dollar supremacy tyranny that we currently live in today. But here's the weird part. It was done in secret. Let's dive into it. So just before we start off really quickly, the crew at GetBase, Julian and Issa, met up with Ian Carroll on Jekyll Island. They toured around, learned a bunch of the history, and the documentary is amazing. It's linked here. If you want to go check it out, I highly recommend you do so after you finish watching, liking, and subscribing to this video. But it's a very complex story, and there's so much more to it. For example, the US dollar used to be backed by what's called a gold standard. Basically, every dollar that was in circulation was backed by a unit of gold representing that dollar. And then, in 1933, the US government took it away. This is called Executive Order 6102. And then magically, basically the US government printed money, gave the dollars to the citizens in exchange for their gold. And the US government then had all the gold. See, most people think it took 40 years for the US dollar to be removed from the gold standard in 1971. However, it was only in 1935, 2 years after the government took all the gold from the citizens, that they devalued the money by double. The US dollar used to be on this gold standard, where every single dollar in circulation was backed by gold sitting in Fort Knox. But then the Fed came in. Basically, the Fed removed the gold from the money and gave the Fed unlimited godlike powers to basically decree money whenever it felt like it needed to. This is the term fiat currency, which by definition means to decree, to distribute, a term that effectively means it has value because I said so. You might refer to it as dictator money. But before the Fed came into play, Americans fought the idea. They actually hated the idea of a central bank and a Federal Reserve currency. So let's do a quick crash course and get some of the internet's perceptions of the Fed.
This building controls the largest economy in the entire world. It is the Federal Reserve Building, located at 33 Liberty Street in the financial district of New York City. 33 is also the highest ranking of the Freemasons.
We are in conspiracy land, baby.
But right underneath our feet of this building that was designed after the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence in 1924, there is 5 stories. 3 of those stories are gold vaults, with about 500,000 gold bars. The Federal Reserve's central bank of the United States of America. It was developed after a series of failures in the banking system until a group of bankers met up in an island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island, made up a plan called the Aldrich Plan in order to control the US economy.
That's so insane that we have leaders, and this still exists today. If you think this was just something that was going on in the 20s, you are sorely mistaken. It is absolutely insane that there is so much power given to these elected leaders, or these so-called elected leaders, some of them actually even unelected leaders, that they have the ability to literally sit in a room and design a plan to control the economy, as if the natural free market wouldn't do a good job. This is what I'm talking. This is the crux of why the incentive system behind Bitcoin is so important, and the crux of why natural incentives and natural ecosystems need to be left alone without third-party interference.
The Federal Reserve right now lends money to the United States government on interest, and the United States government gives it to the people. So we are all in debt of these guys over here, the Federal Reserve. Stay curious, my friends.
It's actually crazy when you think about a money system that is based on debt. You don't understand truly the money that you use is an enslaving debt system. The same NYC Federal Reserve Building's exterior was used by Francis Ford Coppola to show where the Mafia 5 family's meeting was held by Don Vito Tartaglia Barazzini. Good grief with these names in the 3rd act of The Godfather. That's interesting. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Isn't it weird that the private entity would be responsible for printing a country's money? Yeah, that's pretty weird. It's pretty strange. And this is kind of, isn't it weird, even take it one step further, that man has the ability to print money. Money is, like, just think about why we have money. It is simply to solve the coincidence of wants. The reason we have money is so that you can work hard and then have something to spend in the future. It's a representation purely of our time. Giving someone the power to print money is like telling someone you have the ability to print time. You can make more time. This is why a debt-based monetary system is so bad.
The history of Jekyll Island is a little scary. So there's a tribe of Native Americans that used to live there, the Timucua tribe. And the first settlers that came to Georgia were French, and they witnessed them doing blood sacrifices by killing small people.
Oh, goodness.
People small in stature or small in age?
Age.
Oh.
Yes. Very creepy stuff.
Both are sad.
Anyways, fast forward.
Child sacrifices? I suppose it makes sense that the Fed would be, dreamt up on the land of children's sacrifice.
The Timucua end up getting disease and stuff because of the colonizers and whatnot.
The white man.
So a lot of the elites, including the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, the Morgans, came down and they said, we want to build our summer homes here. But the Rockefellers built their house directly over the altar.
The human sacrifice
The one that, yeah.
altar?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Directly over it. And that's where they decided to create the Federal Reserve, in that house.
Ooh.
Man, that is freaky. I don't really have much or many comments on that other than that is disgusting. And you have to be a special kind of messed up to want to build a summer vacation house where, like, presumably you're going to hang out with your children and actually have fun in the summer on the lake over top of a bunch of children's tombs. That's just gross. I'm 1,000% convinced the elites are directly connected to fallen angels. Yo, this is a great take. Understanding the spiritual world is such an important piece to understanding, why things go wrong. And there's a whole morality issue that, why would God let good things happen or bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? And we can go through that on a different episode. But suffice to say, when you have free will in a world, true freedom, you have the ability for good and evil. And a fallen angel, this is biblical. There are fallen angels in the world. There are angels that have gone away from God and wanted to remove themselves from God. This is the Satan. This is the concept or the fact of Satan. We've heard the term, you have to sell your soul to the devil. I don't think it's a coincidence. There are so many of these demonic rituals inside these elite kind of circles. It makes sense that if you sold your soul to the devil, you would get everything you wanted on earth and then be damned for a lifetime or be damned for eternity. Truth will always reveal no matter who tries to conceal. This is a good take too. I think over a long enough time frame, like we have gone through over history, the last 100 years has been an incredible time for awakening the individual. Some might call it awakening the sovereign individual. And people are tired of being fed the same garbage from the mainstream media, the same garbage from centralized sources, the same garbage from someone who's paid and incentivized to feed them garbage. And as a result, we are entering into a world where people are actually starting to think again. The money is cheap, but the world is still unlivable. We are finally waking up to the consequences of a century of manipulated monetary policy. And what this means for you, what this means for me, what this means for us collectively, for our children, for the next generation, is that we have to wake up and we have to fight back against the powers at bay.
Have you heard the theory of the Titanic and the Federal Reserve? Well, here it goes. So on the Titanic, there's some extremely wealthy passengers like J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, and the Rothschilds. But then you have Jacob Astor, the wealthiest man in the world at the time. He owned about 40% of all mortgages, and he was a Freemason who was very opposed to the idea of a central bank. Whereas J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Rothschild strongly supported the idea of a central bank.
You can tell which team won, hey? I never heard of that first guy.
So Jacob Astor was the only one standing in the way of a central bank at the time. Coincidentally, the morning the Titanic was supposed to set sail, J.P. Morgan, some Rothschilds, and others quietly exited the ship without any explanation.
Whoa.
5 days later, Titanic slams into an iceberg, and it starts to sink. And even though Jacob Astor is the wealthiest man in the world, he still can't find a seat in a lifeboat, and he ends up sinking with the ship. Shortly after, these guys become the wealthiest men in the world, and without Jacob Astor standing in their way, the next year in 1913, on Jekyll Island in Georgia, the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law, paving the way to print money out of thin air and completely control our monetary system. Was this a coincidence or a conspiracy?
All right, the timing there is hella suspicious. Obviously, We have no idea. Like, I think there are some customer records and we can confirm that. This video, obviously, there's no receipts here. So let's just take this with a grain of salt. But the timing of that is out of hand. I've heard actually many conspiracies about the Titanic and where or why it sunk. But the important thing, and again, this is 100 years ago now, in 1920. But you have to remember, you have to think, what is happening today? If there is a hint of truth that this existed, even if, or that this is real, even if it wasn't necessarily the intent, or even if it was, there's some perfect explanation because of it, you have to think and understand, what could they be doing today? What could be possible? Who are the people in charge today, and who's standing in their way, and what might they be wanting to do to that person? It begs the question, why don't we learn about this stuff in schools? How come you and I are not educated? We have to run down this rabbit hole, this conspiracy rabbit trail on decentralized media to get answers or understand what's going on. It makes you think. Remember, we heard about the Rockefellers building the summer cabin on Jekyll Island over top of the tombs of the children that used to be sacrificed there. Wouldn't you know it, it was the Rockefellers that also designed the public education system. Now, again, this could all just be coincidence. There could all be reasonable explanations. Of course, the most powerful people are going to be the ones that have the most influence. And that could just be a happy accident. However, this quote comes to mind: "He who controls the present controls the narrative of the past, the history. And he who controls the past is able to manipulate and control the future." And I think we have an excellent case here, but also an opportunity to rise above the control. When we adopt a first principles mindset, when we understand the misaligned incentives of the centralized public education system, when we understand how bad and how taxing this can be centuries down the line, here we are a century after the Fed was created, and we're struggling more than ever. Money supply at an all-time high. Unemployment fairly low, but still things are unaffordable. Where did we go wrong? How can this be happening in a world where we can supposedly send people to the moon and we can talk face to face from across the world? How can we possibly live in a world where our money is so unfair, so unequal, and so geared towards feeding the elites that we don't revolt? Obviously, we know that Bitcoin is the fix for the central bank. Obviously, we know that when we adopt a Bitcoin standard, all of the power from the Fed, poof, disappears and vanishes. And you and I enter into a world that actually has fair and aligned incentives. There is still a risk that another Jekyll Island, another central bank, some other type of centralized force could enter our world, could enter our minds. We had a gold standard and we got rid of it for a high time preference mindset. How do we understand and maintain our low time preference Bitcoin standard mindset? But what else do you know about the Federal Reserve? What else did we not cover? There's obviously a couple conspiracy theories out there. Link me down below and let's wake up together. Let's understand the origins of the Fed, because if you understand where you came from, you can fully understand where you need to go. That's it for me, and stay sovereign.